Hello again everybody, and welcome to video 17 of my Linux Commands for Beginners tutorial series. And in this video I'm going to give you an introduction of the chmod command, which will enable us to change the permissions on files and folders. And chmod, or some people pronounce it shmod, basically stands for change mode. And that command, the syntax is basically chmod and then space, and then whether you're modifying user, group, or other, and then a plus sign if you're adding a permission, a minus sign if you're taking it away, and then the permission you are adding or taking away, and then the name of the file. So that is basically the syntax of the chmod command. And if you are trying to change the permissions on a file that you do not own, in that case you have to type sudo in front of it, but if it's a file that you own, you don't have to use sudo. So I'm going to give you some examples of that command right now. So if I do ls-l, we'll see a list of files that I have in my current working directory. So just to go over this one more time, I know I'm starting to sound like a broken record, I've gone over this a lot, but I really want to make sure that you understand how permissions are laid out before we go modifying them. So basically the permission string, or the first thing that you see when you do a listing, is broken up into 4 groups. The first group is only one character and is either a dash if it's a regular file, or it's a D if it's a directory. So that's what the first part of the permission string is. And the second part here pertains to the permissions for the user or the owner of the file. The third part pertains to the permissions for the group that owns the file. And finally, the last group here, group number 4, that pertains to everybody else or other, also known as world. So if you want to modify the permissions, you first have to find out which it is that you want to modify. So again, chmod is the name of the command that will help us out with changing permissions. And then the next thing you have to do is find out, okay, what permission is it that I want to modify? Do I want to modify the permissions for the user that owns the file? Do I want to modify the permissions for the group that owns the file? Or do I want to modify the permissions for other or world? So once you establish that, so say for example, let's say I want to give group, which is this part here, I want to give group write access, so I'll type G for group, and since I want to add a permission, I use plus, and W is the one that's missing, and that's the one that I want to add, so I'll type W. So group plus write is basically what that means. And then I type the name of the file and press enter. And then what you'll see is that now group has the W now, so the group members can modify this file. So likewise, if I wanted to add a permission to user or the owner, chmod, u plus write, for example, to give the user write access case test, but the user already has that. As you see here, write is already there, so there's really no reason for me to execute that command. I'm just telling you, showing you basically user, group, or other you can add permissions to. So now say for example you want to take away a permission. So let's say for example we want to take away the group permission, the write permission for group that I just added. So okay, so since we want to modify group permissions, we'll type G, and since we want to take something away, we'll use a minus sign, and since what we want to take away is write access, we'll type W, then the name of a file, press enter, and there we go. So that's pretty easy. Now we are missing the W permission in group. So let's say for example I wanted to take away the executable or execute permissions of other. That's fairly easy enough. Other minus X. So now you see that other has only access to read. Group has access to read and execute, but not write. But the owner of the file has access to read, write, and execute. If you see RW or X for that category, that means that category can do anything they want. They can read the file, make changes to it, they can execute it, whatever. So another thing to note is that the chmod command is the same whether you are using it against a file or a folder. So if I do, for example, I want to take away the read access from other, so other minus R, and I want to take that away from test, which is a folder, as you can see. It'll let me do that in ls-l, and sure enough, you see the permissions were taken away just like I requested. So the point there is, whether it's a file or a folder, you could still use the chmod command to change permissions of that file or folder. It goes both ways. So that makes it a little bit easier that you don't have to maintain a different command for files and a different command for folders. So that makes it a little bit easier. But when you're dealing with folders though, just like the chown command from the last video, it accepts the -r flag here. And with the -r, if you recall from the last video, what that is it's recursive. So if it's a folder and you want all subdirectories and all files underneath that subdirectory to all share for the changes to affect everything underneath the folder, you'll use the -r for recursive, and that'll go down the subdirectory tree and modify the permissions of everything. So be careful with that, because you may not want to give everyone permission to everything underneath the folder, but you certainly can by using the -r option against a directory. So another thing to mention here is that you don't have to do these permission changes one at a time. So for example, chmod, and we'll work with, for example, other again, and we will add, say, read, write, and execute. So +R case test. It already has read, but you get my point. Let's say we wanted to add read. Let's pretend it wasn't there. But we also want to do write, and we also want to do execute. So we could execute this command here, and then we could recall the command once we execute it the first time, change this to W, and then execute the command, then recall it again and change this to an X. We could do that, but that's 3 different commands for one permission change. So what you can do is type RWX. You could just type all 3 and press enter, and what you'll see is now other has read, write, and execute. And of course, if it's a group or user, you could do the same thing. So if you wanted to do the same thing for group, we could do that, and there we go. Now everybody has read, write, and execute permissions to that folder, and likewise, or that file, excuse me. Likewise, if we want to get rid of something, just use the minus, then ls-l, and you see that I took away all of group's ownership to that file by using the minus sign instead of plus. So you could do this any kind of way you want. chmod +R if you want to add, user +R if you want to add read. Let's say you also want to add execute, then you can add the X in there. Or if you want to add all 3, or if you want to just add 1, whatever you want to add, you can certainly do that against user, group, or other, and then the file name. And then you could access the file and modify it that way. So basically that's all there is when it comes to the first part of this video in chmod. Now you can actually use a numerical system for changing the permissions of a file or a folder, but I didn't want to cram too much into one video. So the next video is going to go over how to change permissions numerically. So before you move on to the next video though, definitely practice with this. Create some files, change the owners, change the permissions, practice doing it recursively, non-recursively, make sure that you understand it, and the next video won't be so hard. So anyway, that has been your first tutorial on the chmod command, and it will continue into the next one, so I'll see you then.